So this morning, today's speaker is David Stern, who's the president and CEO of Boyce Thompson Institute. David did his undergraduate work at UC Berkeley. I think he was born and raised in California. No?
I'm Canadian, especially today.
Okay. Anyway, so he did his undergraduate work at Berkeley, and then he went to the UK and to Cambridge University, where he got a Master of Philosophy in Biochemistry in 1982. Then he came back to the US to do his graduate work. He got his PhD from Stanford University in 1986. And then he went on to do postdoctoral work back at UC Berkeley. And then from Berkeley, he came to BTI in 1989. So David's just short, 2 years short of being 30 years here at the Boyce Thompson. Let's see, what was it? In 2001, he became the VP for Research. And then in 2004, he became the president of the Institute, a position which he's held to this day. And today, the title of his talk that he's going to tell us here is, which this is a good question that everybody would like to know. It says, where are we headed? Imagining and applying scenarios for the future of plant science, research, and training.
Okay, thanks, Paul, and thanks to everybody who left me the first slot for the morning seminar. I know there was a big battle to get the number one slot. So this talk is about the future and about what plant scientists and plant science will look like in the future. And I suppose it's a little bit ironic to be talking about the future today in the sense that the country is becoming more diverse, and one of the big issues in training is how we're going to diversify the pipeline of students and so on. And the way the country's headed is obviously not very pretty in that regard. And I kind of wake up today a bit ashamed and concerned about the moral direction of the country, and I think there's a pragmatic side, which is that we are an international institution. I don't know how many countries are represented in this room. It's probably 10, 15, or 20. And when we look, we used to have a map up in the hallway over there with a pin where everybody came from. There were a lot of pins in that map, north and south and east and west. So science, the beauty of science is how global it is and how diverse it is and how much we learn from each other and the kind of weird foods you see around here from time to time and at your lab parties. It's a wonderful thing. And to have the leadership of the country march us in the other direction, remind us of times that we always thought were forever behind us, is a staggering moment. And I think people more eloquent than me have had a lot to say about this over the last few days. I think it's very unclear where we're headed. We're headed for a titanic fight over our values, that's for sure. So the spirit of this talk is indeed to embrace the diversity of the future. And I don't want to make the whole talk about politics here. Let's talk about science. But I think it would be wrong not to pay heed to this moment. And there's another side to this whole thing, which is a pragmatic side. I would be pretty shocked if not a single person at BTI was affected by this situation, either now or in the future. And our HR people are certainly going to be here to help. Cornell's put out a statement a little bit stronger. They have, like, the law school, lawyers, resources we don't have. But there is a beautiful thing about our affiliation with Cornell. So if there are any problems, or I should say when there are problems, let's call on those resources. Let's call on that strength of that affiliation to do what we can to continue our good work and also to fight for what we believe in. And I guess I would just say if anybody had a comment or a question on that topic, let's not get too crazy here, but just let anybody say anything that they'd like. I said it all. Okay. So, where are we headed? So, let's recalibrate the where are we headed thing and come back to plant science research and training. Now, this whole activity really has to do with this network called the Plant Science Research Network. And I'm the PI of this grant. Vanessa is a 5% position on it. The co-PI is Crispin Taylor at ASPB. And this is an amalgamation of about 14 different scientific societies. And the main idea behind having a network is that we have strength when we work together. And the plant community is so diverse and has been exhibited a failure to think collectively until recently. And I think the PSRN is a good embodiment of the idea that if the plant science community gets together and builds consensus around the most important goals, its voice will be heard more loudly. And APS, for example, is one of the members of the PSRN, built a lot of momentum in the phytobiomes area, again, by getting the plant community behind it. Now, the origins of the PSRN come from the Decadal Vision document, which some of you have seen. This was an activity that Sally McKenzie and I identified again under the aegis of ASVP a few years ago. The astronomers always have a vision, a decadal vision, where they, I'm oversimplifying, they agree on which telescope is going to get built in the next 10 years. And if the plant community has similar goals, again, consensus goals, these are things we can talk about going forward in the future. Now, these 5 goals that you see on this slide are the titles of the sections of the decadal vision, but if we distill them down, the goals are really ones that I think most plant scientists are familiar with. Genotype by phenotype by environment, so figuring out how plants work and how they respond to the environment. The chemistry of plants, synthetic biology, which is now become synonymous with genome editing, among other things. Of course, the big data issues and the training in big data, the infrastructure for big data, and then reimagining training to take advantage of this and also respond to the way the world is changing. So today, obviously, I'm going to be covering that one in red, which is the reimagining training. Now, as I said, the PSRN comes out of the decadal vision, and the PSRN, the decadal vision was a set of workshops designed to develop the document, the vision document. The PSRN is a 5-year project to carry out those goals. And so there's a lot of activities that the PSRN has or will carry out. So if we start at the top, we have the research objectives that I mentioned, like G times P times E. And the PSRN is building a new document called the National Plant Systems Initiative, which is a much more detailed set of programs that are needed in order to achieve those scientific goals. And phytobiomes is one of them that we've supported. Genomes to fields, EDGE is an outcome of the point made in the decadal vision that we need to work in much more than the traditional model systems. I think George has new funding for that, if I'm correct. And also, Joyce has been involved in an effort on plant transformation, so there's a call for proposals in that. And again, the decadal vision itself isn't solely responsible for any of these things, but it's again the voice of the plant community, and the science agencies love to hear about that. That the plant community has consensus on the most important goals. In reimagining training, I'm going to discuss that today. So these workshops that occurred in 2016. There's also other synergistic activities. So the National Research Traineeships, Eric Richards has been involved in a couple of proposals. These are new NSF training programs. R21 is an Arabidopsis RCN. They're having a workshop on training next month that Vanessa and probably myself will be at. And then there's a much larger biomedically oriented graduate student training effort, which I've abbreviated. That's going to be phase 2 of that's going to be in Colorado in June. So a lot of activity around this this idea that we shouldn't be training today the way we trained 100 years ago. It seems obvious on the face of it, but academia, sometimes people say it's like trying to turn a battleship. I think it's more like trying to turn a solar system very set in its ways, and so we need to think about how to change that. In the big data area, there was a workshop in 2016. Also, Lucas Miller attended that. Cyverse is also an effort that's renamed itself, rebranded, if you will, to try to help plant scientists in this area. And there's also a request for information out from NSF to the community, which PSRN and others are responding to what is, again, what should we be doing in the future? Where should the investments be made? In the sense of diversity, there will be a workshop this year. Vanessa will be running that, or at least organizing it. And there are also a number of other areas where diversity, again, is a goal, so other activities that Vanessa is very well in touch with, and she's the broadening diversity person within the PSRM. And then, how do we communicate in the age of social media and so on? So ASPB started something called Plante, which some of you may have signed up for. I think that the scientific community is really good at sending data around and having conference calls, but where to go for information about careers, where to go for information about events, it's still scattered all over the place. ASPB is trying to bring it all to one spot in Plante, and I think it's a work in progress. So we certainly use it with the PSRN, but I think it has ways to go in becoming the hub that it desires to be for plant scientists. So let's focus on scenarios and training. So we often ask ourselves what the future is. I think it wouldn't be worth being alive if you knew the future. It'd be kind of boring, and there's been a lot of sci-fi written about that. But how do we really think about the future? You know, there's the idea that the future is kind of always in flux. All you got to do is figure out what you want it to be, and you go make the future. There's ideas that the future is just technology gone wild. There's the future that's unknowable. There's the future that you can see if you would just look for it. So let's think of the glasses analogy. So how do we look at the future? All of us in our grant proposal writing and so on, we make projections. We say in 3 years we'll achieve these milestones, or in 5 years we'll achieve these milestones. And we try to extend our knowledge of the present out into the future. But we tend to find an endpoint. If I sequence 10 genes a year for 3 years, I'll have 30 genes. But something always seems to happen. It doesn't quite come out the way we expected. Part of that is why we get out of bed in the morning as scientists, because we don't know what's going to happen. But part of it's that frustration that the best laid plans just don't seem to come. So what scenario planning does is it gets around this idea that there is a future. And so the typical future, if you look at the graph on the left, is we take today, we project out using some multiplier, some formula, and we say, well, there's a little wiggle room, but we're going to follow the line. It's going to be exponential or something like that. On the right, you have what scenarios do, which is to say there's a lot that's unknown. Let's not try to know everything. Let's look at the possibilities. So scenarios are possibilities. They're not predictions. So when people get into scenario planning, you'll see the results can be kind of outrageous. But outrageous is fine. It's just a way of thinking about the future. And it protects you against business as usual, plus or minus 10%, which is the way scientists are taught to think. We're taught to be very linear, very constrained, because if we get too crazy, nobody's going to fund our work. So we tend to be very reserved. So scenarios get you out of your box, and they allow you to imagine multiple futures. And then from those multiple futures, one can actually plan around them. So there's a whole area. We have planners that run strategic planning, but there's scenarists that run scenario planning. And they have a certain set of tools. There's kind of a flow chart here. In the case of our scenario planning, we use this. Scenario planning as a discipline is actually fairly new. It's only a few decades old. It was first used by very large corporations. They still use it. And there's these examples out there. For example, around the oil shocks of the 1970s, where companies that had that in their scenarios, as one of their scenarios, were better prepared than companies that assumed that oil prices would sort of stay the same for the foreseeable future. So scenario planning is a formula, and for doing the scenario planning, we brought in a person who does this work. Amazing, kind of a slave driver at the same time. Lucas testifies that, as well as Vanessa and myself. She did a great job of leading us through it. And so the workshop that we had, scenario modeling, what is this precursor workshop? And the scenario workshop there is a document that came out of it. It's not packaged completely yet. It needs some illustrations and things, but creating scenarios for the future around plant science is an activity that NSF was interested in it and funded, and HHMI funded it, because when we have this set of scenarios, we can use them for a lot of different purposes. So, for example, the 3 other workshops listed up there, 2, 3, and 4, but a number of other activities, including BTI's own strategic plan. So when we go through strategic planning later this year, the scenarios will help us think about where BTI needs to be going forward. What kind of a world might BTI be in? And we didn't get drilled down into too much into politics, but in our scenarios, politics does matter. And so Trumpism, or whatever you want to call it, is kind of baked into to some of the scenarios. Kind of scary about that. So I want to give you a brief introduction, very brief introduction into scenarios, and then tell you what we came out with. So there's basically 2 elements to scenario planning. You have to have a focus. So you can't say, let's develop some scenarios for the future of the universe. Or how many universes even are there? So you got to drill down, you got to focus a little bit, and of course in our case it's going to be around plant science. And then, because everything is uncertain about the future, we have to pick the things that are uncertain that are most important to our focus area. So for plant science, there's some things that may not matter, like, I don't know, what the fashion trends are going to be in New York City, but if you were doing scenarios for fashion design, that probably would be important. So you have to pick the uncertainties that matter the most to that focus area. So this is the kind of a short version of the focal question we came up with in our scenario planning. How do we enable plant science research to maximize its value and impact over the next 20 years? So one has to pick a period of time, and one has to pick what one cares most about. And value of science, again, define that we go on. Impact of science. Impact meaning how well we understand the rules of life, for example, and how well we serve the needs of society. And then for uncertainties, like I said, everything's uncertain. And so we made a long list of uncertainties, and you can read through these. These are some of the things that we don't know about that are going to matter for plant science. And again, I'm not going to go through all these, but what one does, not just for the focal question, but for the uncertainties, is you get messy. So we had rooms, if you thought paper was extinct, we had piles of paper. Like when we rolled it all up at the end, it was like fill your arms, several people's arms, to really work through the issues. This was also done at the bioinformatics visioning last year, down to the most important parts. So the 2 most important uncertainties, as we distilled them for this scenario planning, had to do with the resources that we would have to do science. And at one extreme, if we look at the y-axis, we have what we call expansive or abundant resources. So you kind of think of this magical world without limits. Resources are lots of different things. They're not just money. It could be infrastructure, it could be people, it could be a lot of different things. But the resources would not be limiting. And at the other end, at the bottom, the bad is always at the bottom in scenarios, if you think of it as bad, is when we're limited. Now, we definitely feel limited, but in scenarios that we built, there's worse kinds of limited than the limited that we're in. So, yes, it could get worse, but we were kind of down, probably below the middle of this y-axis. And then on the x-axis, we have what we call the driver of research. So at the extreme left, you have what we call necessity. And what necessity means is, everything we do in science has to have some important purpose. You got to be curing cancer, we got to be fixing, crops with diseases, we've got to be making things more nutritionally valuable, we've got to be solving some problem. Advancement, which is on the other side, is, ooh, I wonder what I'm going to figure out today. I'm going to explore because that's cool. People used to sail the oceans to see what was on the other side. And advancement is you know, with academic careers being so high risk, so arduous, so many hours, a lot of us get out of bed in the morning for the purpose of advancement. At the same time, a lot of us also like to think that we're contributing to something pragmatic, something that matters, would matter very much outside of this environment, this kind of cloistered environment that we're in. So, what if everything we're doing had to be defined as something that's necessary? That would be a world that maybe not all of us would want to live in. If everything was for advancement, then science would look different. So these uncertainties, because the poles of them are so different, and because the two uncertainties really aren't directly related to each other, they create happy scenarios, scenarios that are independent from each other and that look different and that offer kind of a rich resource for thinking about the future. And what one does in scenario planning is one names all the scenarios. They have to have names, so you can see the names that were given to them. And scenario one is always the best scenario, just the way we usually tend to think, is in that upper corner, so we call it Renaissance science. But you try not to denigrate any of your scenarios too much. You want to give them all a chance. There's always things in those worlds that turn out to be better than you thought, and things with unlimited resources and advancement research, which sounds like paradise, it's actually not always as great as you might think. So what are the characteristics of these scenarios? So I've given them names, I've given them some defining characters here. So in the top right, on the Renaissance scenarios, we have very diverse discoveries. So when you don't have limits on resources, for example, you can do whatever you want, and things change quickly. There's a lot of money, a lot of people going into science, a lot of things happen. And if we go down to the bottom, on the right, where we're still in advancement oriented, so we're still discovery oriented, people tend to work together in teams a little bit better because resources are limited. So people band together, and interdisciplinary research really flourishes in an environment where resources are limited. If I can have my own money, I don't have to collaborate as much because I can kind of bring everybody I need. I can build my own team. I have the resources. When I don't have them, I reach out. And so interdisciplinary science flourishes more in limited resources, and we continue to advance our basic knowledge of how things work. We go up in the top left where we have a lot of money, but we're in necessity-driven research. We can solve a problem. Notice, I don't mean any disrespect to Michelle, but we would probably outspend her by 10 or 100-fold on citrus greening if we had unlimited resources. There'd be 50 labs in the country working on it, and we would solve that problem overnight. Tomato taste, we would have had it solved 20 years ago, Jim. You know, if we just had the money, right? So we do great jobs in this world of solving problems, but we work on problems. And so the problem that comes out of the blue, the new Ebola, we aren't ready because we haven't been studying it. We're not discovering the diversity of viruses, the diversity of chemicals, the diversity of life, because we don't need to know it. So we're on a need-to-know basis, but when the problem comes, boom, we solve it. So we're problem solvers. And then we go down to the lower left, where the quote-unquote bad world, where we're kind of ping-ponging from one problem to the other. Today is drought, tomorrow is flooding, the next day is some horrible thing that's killing all the corn, you know, and so on. So the world, kind of that world, we lurch from problem to problem, solving them as best we can, but kind of putting band-aids on things. And there, again, scientists have to be very creative because we don't have a lot of money, and we have these really bad problems we have to solve. So when we sat in the room thinking about it, putting a dot, like where are we today? This was before the election, I remind you. We were about on the lower left quadrant, but kind of near the middle. And if you draw your scenarios right, you're smack dab in the middle. We were a little bit down towards limited. We were a little bit down towards necessity. And that's how we at least perceived our world today. And so, if I put on my advancement hat, I want to move us back up to the upper right. I want more resources and I want more freedom to make discoveries. So the goal of the PSRN, if you will, is to enable that move up to that quote-unquote happier world where we have more ability to discover a more broader range of things. Now, the last point on scenarios is that, and I didn't know this when we started, but you're supposed to bring your scenarios to life. And the trick or the tool for doing that is to create a character that lives in these different worlds. So I created Dakota, and Dakota is a woman. It's actually like 50% boys and 50% girls, but anyway, created Dakota. And Dakota goes through 20 years of her life. She starts out every time in high school, and she ends up in some kind of plant science career. And so Dakota is taken through these short stories. They're a page and a half a piece. They're kind of fun to write. And the way I write, at least, is I don't know what's going to happen to her at the beginning of the story. But I sat in my office upstairs with the curtains closed. It was like a cave. And I had like these big sheets of paper on the wall. And it's one of the tricks of scenario planning is you actually write newspaper headlines for the next 20 years in different scenarios. So anyway, I took Dakota through these different worlds. And she, as I say, she always ends up in a plant science career. But what's interesting about Dakota is that it's her education. So I'm morphing it to training now. And in fact, Dakota never did a postdoc in any of the scenarios. It wasn't planned that way, it just came out that way. She does do a PhD in one of them. But in the rest of them, she has other paths to learning. And it just turned out to be the way that world would appear to her with the places she grew up. She grew up in a place called Blazing Hearth, Oklahoma. And she went through life taking advantage of opportunities that presented themselves to her. And you can see how things happen. Like she ended up in the Mars program in the Renaissance world. There was no need for a postdoc. In a very resource-limited world, she could go straight from a PhD into an academic position because there was no money for postdoc training, and folks just needed to hire in the best young people into their institutions. Here we have Fei Wei, who barely did a postdoc. I'm not even sure he qualifies having done that. So, you know, the future is here, BTI. So I think it really emphasizes that our models for training in the future may have to be rethought, and maybe the traditional path, yes, will still be absolutely the right path for some people. Those who are going into, let's say, more traditional academia careers are not in academia. They're outside of it. And why would we train everybody for the academy if they weren't going? Doesn't make sense. And on the other hand, how do we get research done if nobody's going through training? So these are the kind of complicated thoughts we have to get our arms around. So let me talk for a few minutes around the postgraduate training workshop. And I'll tell you right now that the name of that had to change from postgraduate training. So what I just told you is just borne out by the numbers. These numbers have been widely advertised. That the number of faculty positions in this country is pretty stagnant, but the number of people getting PhDs has been increasing. And it's part of this whole idea. There was another headline in the paper today that, you know, high school degrees just don't cut it anymore. Most careers require more education, so everybody's getting more education. But if you think you're getting a PhD because there's going to be a faculty position waiting for you, you know, the numbers just don't bear it out. So yes, there are faculty positions. Yes, the baby boomers are starting to retire. But no, not every PhD is going to go into a faculty position. Some of them are going to go into industry and other places, but some of those PhDs may not be the best use of somebody's time. So how do we think about this career in another way? This is a tree that ASPB published, came from Human Frontiers program. Again, just reminding us that there's a lot of non-academic positions that are plant science related, and they come with different, if you will, required educational levels. So, as we think about careers, we have to remind ourselves that these are all important careers. Some of them actually could be arguably more important than academic careers, and yet the training required, the understanding of plants, the understanding of biology, all of them require at one level or another, or the more one understands, but the better one can do at those positions. So these are all things that we need in the world. We need more than just more faculty. So when we think about careers and we think about training, there's different models, but the one we most often think about is the pipeline. You often hear that, pipeline. People are coming in the pipeline. They go into the pipeline. The pipeline is leaky. The pipeline has problems. The pipeline is dripping. The pipeline is gushing. But let's get away from pipelines. What we have to think about is that training and careers have multiple possibilities. And so some of these designs here are really saying you start out and don't get yourself in a pipeline. Don't get locked in necessarily. Once I step into that classroom, I got 5 years of this, I got 4 years of that, I got 3 years of that, and all of a sudden I'm 99%. There's different ways to go through life, and the whole idea that came out of the scenario planning was that careers need to be flexible. They need to have many directions. They need to have entry points and exit points that aren't just a pipeline. So how do we turn the scenarios into a plan for training? So we divided ourselves into 4 groups. Each one got a scenario, and each group created training paradigms. And then the 4 groups got back together and found out what actions we could take today would help us no matter which one of those worlds we ended up in or what combination of those worlds we ended up in. And those could be turned into principles, which I'll show on the next slide, and then proposals, what we would do. Let's talk about the principles that this group arrived at insofar as the future of training. So here's the 4 principles. That's Paul Comet. He's on our board, who was at that training workshop. So the first is to increase the responsibility and independence of the trainee. Now, responsibility is a big word because if a trainee goes into some program and they're protected by their PI, they're told what to do by their PI and their committee, the university tells them what to do, the science agency funds the grant that supports them, and that tells them what to do, we become a little bit passive in our training. We expect to do what we're told, and I'm exaggerating, but we expect to do what we're told and not too much to think for ourselves beyond the confines of a few experimental protocols. So if we're going to make people independent or more independent, they better be more responsible. And how do we give them the tools to be more responsible? So if academics over the centuries has said, you're a trainee, you're an apprentice, act like one. If we're going to get out of that box, we have to give people the tools. And so that's a kind of mentorship. So how will mentorship look if we're going to have independence, if we're going to give responsibility, if we're going to be trainee-centric? So those first 2 bullets kind of go together. And then the third has to do with the path, and we're talking about modularizing training. So for example, if you take one of the bioinformatics courses that Lucas has helped us develop, that's kind of a module. You spend a week in a room, you learn to do something. The way we are now, you go into a PhD, 6.5, 7 years. That's your module. You go into a postdoc, 3, 4, 5 years is your module. Those are really, really long. So we believe, and I'm speaking for the group here, that a module should be calibrated to what your needs are in your independent program that you're taking responsibility for. What do you really need to learn? If you're going to be Paul Debbie, you need to learn a lot about IP, maybe not so much experimental experience, hands-on experience. So giving people the tools to develop a program and also giving them modularized training, which is, again, the modules can be anywhere, anything. They have to have some kind of a framework to them, but we need to think again about letting people access the training they need. And then flexibility on and off. So maybe most of us are more fortunate than others, but people may not have the family situation, the economic situation to just go into 5 years or 6 years of graduate school, 3 or 4 years of postdoc, 10 years of their life, basically with no income. How in the world is a diverse population going to achieve that? So adult learning is huge. We have people at this institute taking degrees all the time, especially in our non-scientific staff and our support staff. Adult learning is not a new thing, but nowadays you can learn anything chef yesterday. I made croissant. I'm very proud of myself. All you needed was an iPad and some flour and a lot of butter. It's about a pound to make the recipe. So, again, we can learn in ways that we never learned before, but we also have to give people the flexibility to deal with life. People may want to change careers when they have a family. They may want different kinds of mobility and so on and so forth. So to put this in a context, a very simplified context, we have self-determination and modularity, and then to enable that, as I mentioned, the mentorship model, so not my boss, my guide, my mentor, but my mentors, my mentoring committee, my mentoring network. That's going to be the future here. And then what will be nice and controversial is direct funding. So I know this has already been talked about in NSF Bio before we did this. Taking graduate student stipends out of grants and giving them to graduate students instead. So if you have a grant today, you can put whatever you want. Tomorrow, maybe it's only supplies, some travel, and a technician, and the rest will go to the trainees. And guess what? The trainees are going to go to the best labs and the best organizations that support their career development. And then the modularity, again, making folks aware of what's out there, helping them to organize it, and labeling it in some way, these different modules, so we understand what they're worth. So that if something you say, I took a module or a MOOC, there's some way of understanding what you learned and how good it was, some quality control. So we had a couple of reactions in the room. So this is, again, our group sort of at the end going, wait a minute, what have we done here? And about half the people sort of said, whoa, this was amazing. We got there. We had a light bulb went off. This is great. And the other half were like, there's no way this will ever get done. And so what we need to do is take that I am off the first part of that word and turn the impossible into the possible. So first of all, I need to remind you this is a 20-year scenario. A lot happens in 20 years, a lot happens in 3 months. So again, when we think about the future, we're out there saying in 20 years, this is how we think training should look, not this is tomorrow. So to get from A to B, I have again the 4 key recommendations on the left and how these would be implemented. So if we want to increase independence of trainees, the best way, I think, or we thought, was to give them the money. The second is to enable mentorship. So here, again, BTI has already done something. The PGS has a mentorship program. So you can have multiple mentors. You don't have to have one mentor. But again, we don't want to have this only be at BTI. We want this to be for sciences writ large. Modularizing training, there's a term called micro-credentialing, which some of you may have heard of. There's all kinds of different modules we could think of, internships, rotations, e-learning. There's others we could add. They need to be credentialed in some way. There were suggestions that the PSRN should credential. I'm not so sure. ASBB or could credential. But there needs to be a way of assessing. If you could get a PhD on the web and you could game the system or have your dad answer all the questions, you could be Dr. So-and-so and be meaningless. So how, again, do we create these modules, these learning modules, in a way that they would be understandable, that there would be transparency about what was learned and how well they were run or managed. And the flexibility, so the problem here is that we're overly concerned with labels. So you read a job description and it often says, master's required, PhD required, this required, that required. There's usually some or equivalent experience, but usually we're actually looking for the degree that's listed there. We got to stop thinking about degrees as maybe for academia, but for the other 6 out of 7 that go into science and are not going to end up in academia. For Dakota, it didn't matter. She was a C+ high school student who went to Mars, So not how well do you take tests, not how long did you manage to stay in a program, but what did you learn? What can you do? How well do you work in teams? The intangible things are what most employers care about. The tangibles, yes, but the intangibles are more important. So I think, getting away again from the endpoint idea. If you don't stay until the end of the PhD, you got nothing. If you don't stay till the end of the master's, you got nothing. So let's decouple those. Again, speaking for the group. So as the group got around these kind of things, there was still this kind of groan because there was deans there was graduate students and postdocs, there were professors, and they all said, well, your institutions are never going to change. You'd have to have universities go along with this stuff. Yes, you would. So how do you motivate culture change? So here's a few ideas. I like the one on the top right. We actually had to pay for that image, didn't we, Vanessa?
Yeah.
Yeah. But to me, the power of the purse is important. If the trainees are being funded, they have the money. The institutions are going to compete for the best students or the students that belong there. There are some institutions that care an awful lot about where they're ranked. And if students and trainees have funding, they're going to march to the place that's going to train them right. And so universities will buy in to those cultural changes because otherwise they're not going to get very good students. And the idea of value, the idea of happiness, again, these things are designed to create happy trainees with happy career paths. And the institutions are going to be a part of that mix. And to the extent that they participate in cultural change, those institutions will flourish. And in some of these scenarios, institutions fail. We've seen a few private colleges fail when they didn't deliver value, when they were frankly cheating their students. We've seen privatization. We're going to continue to see that in some of the scenarios. The companies themselves are taking the primary role in training because the public universities are failing to deliver. So people care, and they're very perceptive, and there's a lot of ways of measuring in today's world what kind of value is being delivered. So there are pressure points that will work with institutions to change. There's going to be resistance, especially in my generation, and that always happens with change. And the ones that get on the bus, the institutions, the faculty members, that get on board and lead to change are the ones that are going to be the most successful in the future. At least that's my bet. So another way of thinking about culture change, people say you could never do this, but in fact it's already being done. And so Vanessa collected a bunch of examples here about places that are already doing this, programs that already exist, that do some of the things that were already suggested. And so we heard in the scenario about things in Europe, training things that are done that are student-centric. Geeky scientist Vanessa told me, I didn't know about this until this morning, is helping folks with careers in ways that we haven't done before. So we could pepper, we put the PGS up here, you can see. So we could pepper 10 slides with examples. The problem is that these programs, these points of light, or whatever you want to call it, aren't really known to each other. They're not done in any cohesive way. So there's a grant here to do this experiment. There's a grant there to do that experiment. What we're talking about is making this kind of training paradigm broadly accessible. Not just accessible to a lucky few who happen to be in the right place at the right time. So at the end, what I want to do is kind of bring this back to BTI. I mean, part of the reason I do any of this stuff is because I care about how we train here at the Institute. And let's think about trainee responsibility and independence. And I think the PGS has done a great job not only in creating activities and managing activities, some of them used to be managed by the faculty, but also to push us, to push leadership, to push each other, to change the way things are done. Not just with salary and benefits, but well beyond that. And I think the PGS should give themselves a pat on the back, but also keep pushing for change. And again, mentorship. What can we do here? We have mentoring for faculty. We have a new mentoring program in the Institute. But really, how do we help people make good decisions about their careers? How do we help people do what they want to do, not what we think they ought to do? How do we modularize training? I think we do a good job here at BTI again. Bioinformatics training has been extremely popular. Every time I look downstairs, a bunch of people happily pecking away at their laptops, learning things that I'll probably never know how to do. We train people in imaging. We train them in mass spec. We give them an introduction to technology transfer. I'm just picking a few. What else can we do at BTI? How else can we modularize training? How else can we make it accessible to people who want to taste? We do this in the summer program, too. We give people a taste of science, and it really, really makes a difference in their lives. And about the flexibility of on and off ramps, I think there, again, we have to think carefully. We've been starting to look back at statistics, what happens to people who come to BTI, for example, for postdoctoral training. I mean, the numbers from last year would shock you if you saw them. We're not taking people in as postdocs and turning them out to run their own laboratories. Yes, we are, but not very often. It's just not the most common path. And I think the sooner we get our arms around that and start training people for the things they're really going to do, the better off everybody will be. And it's a culture change. It's not a fun thing to think about all the time, but I think in the end, it's the best for the people who come and spend a part of their lives at BTI. We need to think about the futures that they want to have, that they're going to have, and train them to those futures. So I'm going to stop there. Thanks a lot, and I want to acknowledge a number of people who have been part of this, NSF obviously for supporting it, both in Plant Genome and in the Division of Graduate Education. It's been giving us a lot of resources. HHMI has supported this. They participated in scenario planning directly. Natalie Hinkhouse, who used to be Eric Richards' graduate student, runs the PSRN as an executive coordinator. We have a steering committee representing those 14 scientific societies. Susan Stickley was our scenarist. Crispin is the co-PI of the grant and S I mentioned. Again, she also was a big part of getting these slides together. So thanks very much. Questions or comments on the future? Great.
A lot to think about. You just presented there. It will absorb it all so quickly, but there was an article a couple of weeks ago in the Wall Street Journal, the opinion piece, and the gist of it was that universities are going obsolete, that we're not going to need universities in the future, and they're not about education, they're really about credentials. And that's kind of what you're alluding to here. And their point was that a few universities, big universities, are going to survive, places like Cornell and Harvard, because of that point. People want to go there to pay for essentially a credential. And I guess the fact that we're on the campus of Cornell, one of these that might survive, do you have thoughts about more of what a BTI can do to get involved with what's going on in Cornell in terms of credentialing? I mean, you might know they have this master's in practice that they're really talking about in plant science, and are there things that we can do to, in other words, connect with a bigger ship going forward?
Yeah, I mean, you have Cornell just as an example, and we're not, we aren't part of that, but we're party to it. I think people should participate in the frameworks that Cornell creates. The same ideas with this immigration crisis. It's a big ship. So if BTI wants to offer modules, we should, I think, go into their network. I wouldn't try to develop too much of a separate identity as far as education, classroom or learning type education goes. I would say the biodiversity initiative that, again, Luke is kind of a brainchild. Cornell is very, very interested in parasitizing what we do here for that. And we run into a size problem, of course, because we're little, and if we open our doors to everybody at Cornell, we'll be overwhelmed. So BTI is always going to have to strike a balance between doing things that are important for it as an independent entity versus doing things for the greater world of training. I don't know if that's a really good answer, but I do agree with your premise. I think that, universities are at risk. There's been a lot of press about, is it really worth it? My niece went to Colgate for a couple of years, and I forget, what ungodly sum of money, and then quit. She realized that it was a lot of fun, but having a personal chef at college probably wasn't a good value for her mother's and father's money. So what is the value proposition really? And as people start to decide maybe the value isn't there, they're going to go to the community colleges. They're going to do piece-by-piece education. And I agree with you. I mean, the first university was founded, I remember like 1066 or something in Italy. I mean, this is a 1,000-year-old model, almost. The first PhD was given in this country about 150 years ago. And, you know, that's an old model. It's an old model. And the older they get, you know, I remember going to Cambridge, so I got a degree there. The fire escape in my friend's college was a rope, hook on the end. Still, at Peterhouse, the college was founded in 1200 and something. So we have an infrastructure that's very old, and I think yes, it is a risk, and maybe it should be a risk. I mean, universities are very expensive places to run. People ask me all the time. They go, "Cornell's got a $5 billion endowment. You know why? Why don't they ever seem to have any money? You know, because universities cost a lot of money." So I think this you know, the way universities have handled it is, they do things like they hire lecturers, you know, for very low amounts of money. They hire temporary help. They're trying to patch the leaks while they pay a lot of money for things that they may not need, that may not deliver the value. So yeah, I think the e-learning model, I think the modularization, the community colleges have a huge role to play here, and I think there will be a winnowing going forward. Other comments?
Do you believe that federal support for science, especially the plant sciences, will continue?
Yes, I do. I'm sure it will continue. I think the good news about federal support for science is it's kind of one of the few things that both parties agree on. They seem to agree that you know, we are an intellectual economy here. We're an economy of ideas, and that research and development is important. So that's the good news. The bad news is that we don't have very much money, and usually they move from one pocket to the other. So I think, you know, how the budget wars come out, whether we actually decide to pay our bills, you know, we haven't had a fight over the debt limit for a little while. These are the macro issues that tend to influence the amount of money that goes into science. I also think there'll be a lot of pressure in this administration. We've already seen it. You know, never mind if we just set aside this whole immigration nightmare right now, the Muslim ban, whatever you want to call it, this shuttering of the EPA, you know, telling them, what if the USDA, you guys had a shot across the bow at ARS, right? What's next? You're going to work for NSF. If you have the word climate in your grant proposal, somebody's going to do a search for that word, and your grant's going to be thrown out. And you think today that's an imagination. Tomorrow that could be coming out of this nutcase White House. So I don't worry too much that science will or won't be supported. I worry about, you know, the lower left quadrant where everything has to be justified and there's not much money to do it. And who's going to want to go into a science world like that? And one interesting thing about it is in this need-based science is that there's a whole cultural segment that becomes interested in science that wasn't interested before. Like people from cultures who understand what solutions to problems mean. They want to go into science. But that's only a little piece of good news down there. So I worry more about the direction than I worry about the money. The money's already so bad, I don't think it can get too much worse. My idea is it's going to get better. But I worry about the intellectual constraints and the politicizing of science. That really scares me. It takes us back 700, 800 years. I mean, what in the world is going on? We need a new renaissance, you know. Other comments? Yes?
Not going with the scary stuff. When you say that you want to remodel the funding situation with students, where you want to funnel that directly to the students, how do you see that happening in the lab of your day or tomorrow?
Yeah.
How do projects get planned? How do they get implemented?
Right. It's a really good question. I mean, okay, today, if a student comes to a lab and says, I've got an NSF graduate fellowship, I can guarantee you the door of almost every lab flies open because nobody has any money in their labs. So how many of you faculty would not take an NSF-funded graduate student if they were great? So most people will take them. It does open doors. Money opens doors. Now the question of what that student comes in to do is a really good question, but I can tell you the hidden dream of most faculty members, they have the obvious thing, I got my grant, I need a renewal. This is the bad news. The good news is they always have 5, 10 projects that they got no money for and nobody to do them. And when that self-funded student comes in, they can do whatever they want because they're not paying them off a grant that has to have a renewal written in 2 years on this topic. So with that freedom of the student comes the freedom of the post. And I think that's the key issue there. I think it'll be just fine. Other questions? Now, I have to tell you, I get emails like every day about somebody who knows about some program or that is one of these points of light where they got some reason that this whole thing won't work, or they got a question, or they got a comment. Send them on, bring them on, because it's about the community making these decisions, working together. So anything you hear that you think might be relevant, I want to know about it. Any thoughts you have? Okay, well, thank you.